I want to thank you all for staying with us, and thank you to the folks who are watching online. We so appreciate the fact that you hope to be informed voters, and we're trying to help you with that process. Right now, we have our Democratic candidates hoping to take the seat for District 36 for the North Carolina Senate. Please welcome Robert Brown. And also Andrew Platek. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And just like we did with our Republican candidates, Dr. Amy Blake and Paul Newton, I'm going to attempt to ask you very, very similar questions so that our voters can get a real sense of the differences between you as candidates. And we will begin with our opening statements. And I'm going to start with you, actually, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Beth, and thanks everyone for hanging in there to see the two Democrats running for Fletcher Hartzell's seat. Appreciate it. I'm Robert Brown. I'm a native Carolinian. I was born actually in South Carolina, and our family moved to Charlotte when I was about 10 years old. And then we moved to Moore County, so I've lived in Charlotte, Moore County, and then back to Charlotte. Spent most of my career in Charlotte, and about 12 years ago I moved to Philadelphia. When I came back, that was when the Kannapolis Research Center was being spoken about a lot, and I thought, well, gee, I'll just buy a house in Kannapolis and make a fortune and retire. Things didn't quite work out that way. Kannapolis has been struggling. I think we're doing a lot of things now that will help the future of Kannapolis, but I haven't gotten wealthy in real estate there. I'm a Democrat. I'm also a certified public accountant, if you can put those two together without suffering any kind of cognitive dissonance. As a Democrat, I'm a moderate. As a certified public accountant, I am very solutions-oriented, and I think I have also experienced firsthand some of the tax legislation that we have in North Carolina's effect on small businesses and people who may not have the means of those of us who can afford to spend a couple hours here listening to candidates speak. There is still some suffering in Kannapolis, in other parts of Cabarrus County, and other parts of North Carolina. As a candidate, I feel like it's my responsibility, and what I want to do is address the needs of people who don't always have a strong voice in government, but whose decisions of government can highly affect them. I also work with some small businesses. Now, the small businesses that I work for aren't C corporations. Most of them are LLCs, subchapter S corporations, sole proprietorships. So they haven't benefited from the reduction in taxes that the C corporations have benefited from and are still benefiting from. It's my understanding that it's gone from 5% down to 4% because we made enough money in revenue so that we can cut C Corp taxes again down to 4%. Then if we meet another milestone, we're going to cut them down to 3%. Well, that's great if you're a C Corp, but it's not so great if you're a subchapter S or an LLC or a sole proprietor. So I'm kind of fighting for those folks too. They're my clients, and I'd like to see them do well. I went to Appalachian State, graduated in 1977. I went to Wake Forest University and received an MBA there in 1981. My father was a CPA. I worked for him. It was quite an experience, but it's one that I value very much. And I lost him just a couple of years ago and still miss him. That's me.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
I was just about to call time, so you fit that in. You fit that in perfectly. Now, Andrew Platek, your chance to open. Tell us who you are.
Fantastic. First, I'd like to thank everyone for being here today. Being here for 3 hours in the middle of a day is a big commitment, and it shows how committed you are to the voting process that we have in North Carolina. Thank you, Ms. Troutman, for moderating this today. I'm Andrew Platek. A little bit about me. I don't know if you can tell by my voice. I was not born here in North Carolina, but that doesn't mean that I don't call this place my home. I moved to North Carolina in 2006 to seek something that my birth state of New York was unable to offer me, and that was a job. I graduated in 2005 from the State University of New York at Geneseo with a degree in mathematics education, and Geneseo is just one of the many colleges in New York that has a teacher preparation program, and so there was a saturation in the market. And in New York, they have very strong teacher unions, and the benefits are very good, and people do not leave those jobs. And so it was very hard for me to find that. And thankfully, with enough research, I was able to find out that Cabarrus County was hiring, and it was the best decision I've ever made. I've worked at J.M. Robinson High School. I'm currently working at Northwest Cabarrus High School. And what it's done is it's given me the opportunity to see kind of the layout of Cabarrus County from a couple of different perspectives, more in the Concord area, and then also the Kannapolis area. What strikes me most is how we could be doing more in North Carolina to be offering services to our students. We currently rank 48th in the nation in per pupil spending. We spend about $8,800 per student, where the national average is $12,200, and that's a pretty big gap there. Just kind of anecdotally speaking, I have a lot of students, and they come from a lot of different backgrounds. And what strikes me, having worked at both J.M. Robinson and Northwest Cabarrus, is that we have students that come in tired. And it's not just because they're up late playing video games. A lot of them are at home because they're taking care of their brothers or sisters while their parents are out working. And they're also working part-time jobs themselves, which that indicates to me that our families are not making enough money. And we need to be able to get cash back in the hands of working class families, people that are willing to work 40 hours a week. We need to make sure that they can afford to pay their bills, to buy groceries, and to take care of all the other things. So I think as a teacher, I've gotten a pretty unique perspective on the atmosphere and the climate in Cabarrus County. And so, yes, I am a Democrat, and there are certain things that I'm more moderate on, certain things that I'm a little bit more left-leaning on. But I think when it gets to the end of the day, I think what we really need to focus in on is how do we take care of the families that are in Cabarrus County and in the state of North Carolina, and how do we make sure that they have the means to survive.
Now, as I said, I'm going to be asking you similar questions that I asked our Republican candidates. So I'm going to just start with the very basic question that was submitted to us online. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Platek. What you feel is the single most important issue that our state is facing today?
I may be slightly biased, but as I mentioned in my opening statement, I think education is a huge thing. And if you take a look at education and how it permeates into all of the other aspects of the climate of North Carolina, when we talk about business and when we talk about growth of the economy, if we do not have an educated workforce, then we cannot draw business to our state and to our region. I think we need to focus in on how to build 21st century skills and how to write a curriculum that is not prescribed to us by the federal government. And now that we have the Every Child Succeeds Act, we have the control back at the state level to make a curriculum that works for our students and it can work for our businesses and actually promotes the the skills necessary. We're in a 21st century workforce. We need to work on technology. We need to work on computer programming. We need to focus on financial literacy, and those are things that we do not have as part of our core curriculum. So for me, I think we need to take care of our students, not to mention the fact that we have teachers that are struggling financially as well. When we talk about myself and my wife, we're both educators. Almost one of our paychecks goes to just daycare. And we have to work second jobs, and there's a lot of teachers in North Carolina that have to do that. So we need to find a way to compensate our teachers better as well. So to answer your question, what's one of the most important issues? I'm going to say education.
Thank you, Mr. Platek. And the same question, Mr. Brown.
Well, I'm going to have to say the same thing, that one of the particularly important issue in North Carolina right now is education. We've heard a lot of statistics today about where we stand right now in education, and just about every statistic, whether it's true or fact, we're in the bottom as far as pay per pupil, as far as teacher pay, where we used to be in the middle. So I think one of the things that we have to address is how we can at least get back toward the middle. And I think both Republicans and Democrats see the same statistics. We may have a little bit different idea about how to get there, but in the final analysis, I think we both want to get there. I would also say that job creation is a very large issue here. Most of the jobs created in the United States start off very small. They don't start out as General Mills. They don't start out as Apple. They start out with just a few people and employees and an investment. We need to make it easier for small companies to make those investments without penalty. I can talk about some of the details later when we talk about jobs, but I would say those are two issues that are hand in hand. We've got to have an educated workforce. We've got to be able to recruit the large companies to come here. Gosh, we've got the corporate tax rate down to, it looks like it's going to drop to 3%. We need to call that in. We need to say, look, this is what we've done. So we need to call those chips in and recruit some of those large companies here in Cabarrus County and throughout the state. We've done a lot for them. Now it's our turn, I think, to call those chips in.
Now, you both touched on education, and I want you to briefly expand a little bit upon the idea that our education system is struggling. So, Mr. Brown, I'm going to start with you. How would you change what's going on here in the state? What would you put into action?
Well, one of the things that we have right now is a grading system of A through F. Okay, some of you may have heard about it. And what it boils down to from just about any viewpoint is that the A's are assigned to affluent schools in affluent neighborhoods, and the F's are assigned to poor schools in poor neighborhoods. One of the things that we need to do is we need to commit resources to shore up our struggling public schools, the ones that are making the F's. Not threaten them with closure, not threaten them with, well, we're just going to start a charter school, and with this charter school, we're not going to have any kind of oversight, which we should have with charter schools. Nothing wrong with charter schools, but they have to be done slowly. We have to build quality of charter schools, and we have to hold them accountable. We can't just use them as a way of siphoning off public funds that should be committed to our public schools. So the A through F system, if that makes sense, it's a commitment of resources. It's money that we're talking about, and we've got to have the will to commit that money to those resources. Teachers also need to be respected, and Andy, I commend you. And any teacher that goes in day by day to fight the good fight, we need to offer them the economic, financial support. We need to be in the middle as far as teacher pay. Let's get there. But we also need to offer them the respect that they are due. These are highly educated, highly motivated people who are putting their hearts into a career that doesn't pay that much, and they're not asking for it, but they do need the support. We need teacher assistants back.
And Mr. Platek, same question. How would you make education better? And obviously you have a vested interest
Sure,
in this.
Absolutely. I think Mr. Brown touched on what I refer to as the bogus state grading system, and there have been studies that show that the more affluent systems are going to be the ones that get the better grades. Speaking from the perspective of a Cabarrus County teacher, I think we have done our best to buck that trend. We have really good schools that come from not the best socioeconomic backgrounds. Northwest Cabarrus has a large population. I think we're hovering around 50% free and reduced lunch. We got a B on our last report card, and so we're committed to it, and it's because we as a staff understand our purpose and what we have to do to make sure that our students are prepared. I agree also that we need to get our teacher salaries back up to the national average. And I think other things that we need to focus in on as well is Cabarrus County, all the high schools within the next couple of years, and many of them already have this. We have the National Academy Foundation certifications. J.M. Robinson is dealing with robotics. Northwest Cabarrus is health sciences. Cox Mill is dealing with information technology, just to name a few. And what that does is it gives the students an opportunity to more or less major in a particular field. And the the Academy, the foundation, is a wonderful resource for our students to be able to find jobs. Now, the problem is that many of those jobs are going to lead our students out of state. We need to make sure that we're getting those businesses into our state so that the students that we're training in our schools are actually going to stay here in the state and help stimulate our economy. A lot of these things are going to cost a lot of money. And I think when you talk about increasing teacher salaries and increasing per pupil spending, that scares a lot of people. Where's that money going to come from? And so, again, solutions-oriented collaboration. And I think as a teacher, I have to make some pretty hard decisions on a daily basis, and we have to work with. I work with teachers every day, and I think the most important thing is being able to come together, find the middle ground, to realize that our students, our children, our ultimate goal is to make sure that they succeed.
You just mentioned, you both touched on jobs. You just mentioned that if we do have our students trained, we need to make sure that they stay here because we need to make sure that jobs are available. So talk to us about how you would help create jobs, help make sure that our citizens do have jobs available to them, that their skills, where their skills can be actually utilized.
Mr. Brown touched on this a minute ago when he was talking about how Google and Apple, they didn't just appear out of nowhere. They didn't materialize. They started small. And I think what we need to do is we need to foster an environment where small business can flourish, and so where people have as few barriers to entry, and we can mitigate the risk that goes along with starting a small business. To kind of expand on that, one of the things that I'm a firm believer in is that $7.25 an hour is a very, very small minimum wage. And it's a long-term investment, and it's going to stink at first. But I think if we were to increase that minimum wage now, which our neighbors in Greensboro, they're fighting for $15 an hour by the end of this decade. And again, that's a scary number. But on on the short term, that's going to hurt our businesses. But if we can stay the course and in a long-term investment, what we'll end up seeing is that the money goes to the hands of the people that are actually going to spend it. When we give tax credits to people that are extremely wealthy, they tend to, they hold on to that. They put it in their bank accounts, they save it for their retirements, but they're not going and turning around and they're not putting it back into the local economy. When you put money into the hands of the working class, the people that are actually going to spend, they're going to go to the malls, they're going to buy homes. What ends up happening is that capital comes into the businesses. Small businesses grow, they can hire more people, demand increases for products, and so ultimately the supply needs to increase as well. And so I think the first thing I would like to see happen is an increase in the minimum wage in order to see that stimulation occur.
And really quickly, before I move on to Mr. Brown with the same question, how do you feel about the current state incentives program?
I think when you offer incentives at the state level in terms of tax breaks and other things like that, I think that it's a Band-Aid. It's not really a permanent solution, and it does not take care of really it's a home remedy for what the actual issue is. And the fact is that we have too many people that do not have enough money in their bank account. And so the incentives work in getting money back into the hands of small businesses, but we need to make sure that they're actually going around and investing in their business with that.
And Mr. Brown, same question about creating jobs and bringing jobs into our area and the state incentives.
Well, thanks. We're in the same boat with all the other southern states as far as incentives are concerned. We're almost forced to play the game. So I don't think that that's going to be anything that goes away, but I would like to say that we have incentivized a lot of corporations with the reduction in the corporate income tax, C Corp. So I'll go back to what I said earlier. We need to sort of call in our chips on that. That's a pretty big incentive, down to 3%, or the potential of going down to 3%. It's at 5 now, going to 4, and then another 1% down. So we've already got one of the incentives in our bag. It's already in our legislation. We just need to be a little bit more persuasive about getting corporations to take advantage of that. As far as the other incentives go, like I said, we are going to have to compete with other states, not only southern states, but throughout the United States for the large corporations to come. But at the same time, we need to do more to help foster the sort of long-term businesses that hopefully we will grow here and will stay here. We need to help those businesses too. One of the things, if I've got enough time.
About 1 minute left.
1 minute, okay. I want to talk just a second about Senate Bill 20. A lot of you probably aren't aware of it, but the folks that I have that are small businesses are very aware of it. There's a federal deduction called a Section 179 deduction. That's where you can write off equipment expense, right, up to $250,000 as an expense rather than have to capitalize it and depreciate it over a long period of time. So what that does is it reduces your tax bill. Federal has it. North Carolina said, well, if they're going to take it with the federal, guess what we're going to do? We're going to have them add back 85% of the difference between the deduction and $25,000 and capitalize that. So it's like, well, the federal government has a better incentive than North Carolina does for small businesses. And this is where I get a little confused about some of our legislators saying we're all for small business. Well, why'd you do that? Why'd you take something away that helped people?
We're actually going to move on to the next question for your trying to stick with time here, but that you kind of touch on this idea, the power of the General Assembly and how it certainly affects people. This is a question I asked earlier. In 2015, the General Assembly changed the election process in the city of Greensboro, for an example, to have council members elected by district. They also took away the mayor's veto power, and there was no vote by the citizens of Greensboro on this change. And I'm going to start with you, Mr. Platek. If you are elected, would you support this type of legislative action for any city or county in North Carolina or municipality in North Carolina? Why or why not?
I think I would definitely not support that in any way, shape, or form. I think on a local level, we as members of our community know our community best, and it's always frustrating when we see people at a more higher level, whether it be at the state level or the federal level, seem to think that we know it a little bit better, or seem that they know it a little bit better. And I think, you know, when you talk about in terms of the federal government and how they're trying to take over some of the different things, you know, we can talk about guns, we can talk about abortion, we can talk about all the other social issues as well, but I think the control needs to stay with those local governments, and I think that should not have happened, and so I would not support that. So,
and Mr. Brown, same question.
I don't know what they were doing wrong. You know, I don't. If somebody's doing wrong, take it to court. But I don't know what Greensboro was doing wrong. I don't know what Asheville was doing wrong. I don't know what Charlotte was doing wrong. So I would have to agree. I think with just about everybody else here, let local control be local control unless you're messing up, unless you're doing wrong, unless you're hurting people. Okay, and then take it to court.
Now, one question that I asked earlier, and Mr. Platek just briefly mentioned it, and it is a polarizing issue. And Mr. Brown, I'll start with you. Is the idea of our mass shootings that have happened across our country in the past few years, in the past few months. Certainly gun violence has been up. We just saw a shooting at North Lake Mall on Christmas Eve. What would you do as a leader to communicate about gun violence, to maybe curb gun violence? Where do you fall on this issue?
Well, I am certainly against gun violence. Okay,
I hope so.
I fall very decisively on the side of against gun violence. But I can say, as a gun owner, I'm not a concealed carry owner, but I own guns. I was born and raised in the Carolinas. I mean, come on. Everybody had guns when I was growing up. We have a pretty good system. We have background checks here. When I was getting a handgun, they called everybody that I listed on the sheet and talked to them. The sheriff's department did. So I think that we need to keep guns out of the hands of convicted felons. Sure, but I think North Carolina stands pretty good compared to a lot of states on the kind of scrutiny that they give to people who are purchasing handguns.
What about you, Mr. Platek?
So in December, Cabarrus County Schools, in cooperation with Concord Police Department and Cabarrus County Sheriffs, we received a training on response to school shootings. And in that training, one of the statistics that jumped out at me is that nearly every county surrounding Cabarrus County has had some sort of gun on campus incident over the course of the last 15 years since 2000. Cabarrus County has not. We have not had any incidences that are reported of gun violence on school campuses. So that leads me to believe that we're doing something right. It could be the ticking time bomb where it's going to happen eventually. But I am not a gun owner, but I am not naive enough to think that we need to be taking everyone's guns. We have a Second Amendment. I strongly support that Second Amendment. We have background checks. We have things that are here. Just a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned my University of Geneseo up in New York. There was actually a double murder / suicide that occurred. There was a young man who had broken up with his ex-girlfriend, and he broke into her house and found her next to another young man. What's striking to me is that those murders were not perpetrated with a firearm. they were committed with a knife. So I think it speaks to a larger issue in that someone that wishes to do harm to another individual, whether that be with a gun, with a knife, with an explosive device, that's the issue is how do we prevent people from trying to commit these acts of violence? And that is a strong mental health issue. And as long as we are keeping the guns out of convicted felons, people that are shown to not be responsible gun owners, we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to prevent that.
A question that I also asked earlier, this was submitted by a concerned voter. They do believe that the General Assembly is extremely polarized right now and divided along party lines. Mr. Platek, I'll ask you first. How would you unify leaders, increase communication, and help voters feel that votes aren't happening just based on party lines, but in the best interests of voters?
One thing that in my 10 years of teaching that I've learned is how to keep a calm head when you're interacting with people, we'll say high school students who are a little bit more temperamental. And sadly, in the polarized state that we have, I think we do have politicians that are acting like adolescents, and they're going to they're going to throw temper tantrums, and they're going to try to convince us that they're right and that we're wrong, and that's not necessarily the truth. Seek first to understand, then seek to be understood. We have to be open to multiple viewpoints. And so I think we have to be listening to each other. No one's wrong here. We have good ideas. Find where the common ground is and then fight over the details with that. But we have to make sure that we are taking care of our constituents, our residents in North Carolina, because when the General Assembly bickers, they fight over the budget process, and we have a budget that is passed 2.5 months too late, costing millions of dollars of taxpayer money. That hurts us. And so we need to keep our ears open, and we have to understand that it's okay. Compromise is not a dirty word.
And Mr. Brown, same question.
Well, I serve on the Soil and Water Conservation District. There are Democrats and Republicans on our board, and we generally don't have those kinds of problems of polarity. I think anything that I can do to diffuse anger, because I do find when people are angry, they think they're right. Anger clams them up and they think they're right. But if you can diffuse anger and try to see things from another point of view, even if that point of view doesn't make sense to you at first, then I think you come a long way toward diffusing it. And I honestly, just listening to folks here today, I don't think there's really that much polarity in North Carolina. I think we're all Carolinians. We all want good lives for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren. We have different ideas about how to get that and what the possibilities are. But I think we all do want the same thing. And like Ms. Long said, there may be people on the extreme right or the extreme left who disagree, but in the middle is where all the work gets done. So that's my answer to that.
And we are almost out of time. I certainly appreciate both of you. I'm so glad that you were both here. And because I started with you, Mr. Brown, for the opening statements, Mr. Platek, I'm going to go to you first for any closing remarks you might have.
Just to kind of touch on some things that we didn't have an opportunity to talk about through the course of the question and answer. Transportation is kind of a huge issue. I had mentioned that I moved here in 2006, and my one and only, I don't like to use the word criticism, but just the setback that I think that we had here is our road system. And in those 10 years, we have made a lot of strides in making it easier for people to get from point A to point B. In those 10 years, we've seen the completion of the I-45 loop, which has alleviated some of the congestion on Highway 73 getting to Huntersville. We've also seen the expansion of I-85 to alleviate the congestion on Concord Mills Boulevard. And we're currently seeing the expansion of George W. Lyles Parkway to connect Route 3 all the way down to Route 49, something that hits very strongly for me, as that is, when that is completed, that will be my primary means of getting to work if I'm not elected. So one thing that I would like to see as well is more sidewalks and more greenway. I think we are making progress with that. Along the Lyles Expressway, we've seen greenway expansion. There's a greenway right around the corner from here, and as long as things continue to go as planned, I could get from here to my home over near Frank Lisk Park simply by going on the greenway. And I think what that does is it reduces the number of cars that you have on the road, which alleviates congestion and makes it easier for people to get from point A to point B. You reduce carbon emissions, and so there's an environmental factor that needs to be taken into consideration there. And another thing that we see is as well, personal health. Why get into a car when you can walk or you can run or you can ride your bike? I would like to finish up by talking about how, as an educator, I have passion. I have a lot of passion for people that don't have a voice. They're the little guy, so to speak. And so we need to have people that are going to go to bat for them. And I, by extension, not just my students in my classroom, not just the students in my school, but also the residents of Cabarrus County and the residents of North Carolina. So on March 15th, when we are casting our ballots for the Democratic seat, or for the Democratic primary for the state Senate seat, District 36, I hope that you remember my passion, and I hope that you cast my name on that ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Platek. And Mr. Brown, closing statements.
Thanks. I just have to say that I was at Food Line this morning. And one of the things I was curious about was what the tax is on Pampers and Depends. And I found out it's 7% on Pampers and 7% on Depends. So we're taxing people coming and going. Now, one of the things, and in between, now folks, you got to hear it, in between, we're taxing 7% on Public Service in North Carolina, Piedmont Natural Gas, Duke Power. One of the objectives of the legislature, or some people in the legislature, is to reduce income taxes and broaden the base. Some of you may have heard that. And it works, because people have to have Pampers, and they have to have Depends, and they have to pay their Duke Power bill, and they have to pay their Public Service in North Carolina bill. So all that adds up to some pretty good tax revenue. It works. It does. But is it fair? And that's the question that I want to answer. To me, maybe not. Maybe not so fair. And when you look at the rest of the dog's breakfast, and I have to admit, I'm looking at it as a CPA and an accountant, I just go, what in the world have we got here? We're collecting taxes. We've got plenty of revenues. We've got a surplus, $1 billion surplus. But is it fair? And one of the things that I would like to do is really review our tax system, our tax structure, for its fairness. Now, is it going to be fair to everybody? No. Is it going to be fair to most people? Is it going to help more people than it hurts? That's the question that I want to answer. And I would appreciate your vote to allow me to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you both so much, and thank you all for sticking with us. I know it was a long afternoon, and thank you to all the candidates who joined us. We so appreciate it. We appreciate your passion, and we appreciate your passion as well. Thank you so much.